Amen. Thank you. When Barbara and I moved to the San Francisco Bay Area in the late 90s, it didn't take us long to discover that any answer to any question about how far away something was meaningless if the answer was given in terms of distance. With 8.5 million people crowding around that bay, no one ever answered a distance question with a distance answer. No, the answer was always, it depends. It depends on the time of day, on when you start out on your journey, on whether one of the bay's bridges was blocked or there was an accident in the tunnel, or on what sort of debris had fallen in the road to slow everyone down. In fact, I began to keep a list of my favorite roadside debris reports from that era. The two I most remember the radio announcer saying were the 4 porta potties that had managed to escape and were now in the middle of the freeway, and the 6 crates of live chickens. And just as Southern Californians love to endlessly argue about which route to take among their 11 zillion freeways, Bay Area residents will argue about whether it will take 30, 45, or 90 minutes to get from A to B. But whatever the arguer's answer, they are always couched not in terms of distance, but in terms of how long. How long? That's the question that is so poignantly posed in our psalm today as we celebrate the 3rd Sunday of Advent and continue a sermon series theme where we honestly acknowledge, as I said 2 weeks ago, the ambiguities and even pain of the season. And yet at the same time, as we also realize that to skip over those, to not acknowledge those things and leap right ahead to Christmas as the culture all around us has been doing for months, is to cheapen and even trivialize the meaning of Christmas. But it is a question that we also ask, isn't it? How long? How long? How long, we ask, until there is that promised peace on earth when we read that there were 5,000 killings by Middle East extremists in the month of November? How long, we ask, until there is harmony between people of different ethnicities when we watch with horror an unarmed man choked to death? How long? How long, we ask, with an ache in our hearts at how the sword seemed to be winning over the plowshares, when in the last 2 years over 2,000 soldiers were killed fighting against those who would torture and enslave women in the name of a blasphemous understanding of the God we both worship? How long? How long, we ask, remembering the 300 homeless women, men, and children in Colorado Springs? How long until there are children who no longer wonder where they will sleep tonight as we celebrate indeed the birth of the child who himself was born in a barn? How long? How long, we ask, as we gather around nativity scenes of the first family of our faith, until the rifts in our own families might be healed, or until the pain from the missing member of that family no longer seems quite so raw? How long? How long? Yes, we can understand the psalmist's cry, written there in the midst of 70 years of slavery, echoing the line we sang this morning about Israel mourning in lonely exile and captivity, far from home in Babylon, wondering about how long it might be until their terrible journey was done and what the road ahead looks like. For as my wife Barbara said in a recent sermon, quote, "It's a hard, harsh world that eats up new victims every day. We're living now in a place, heaven help us, where children are stolen and trafficked, and the aging are warehoused, and the nations have invented horribly ingenious ways to hate. And we are anxious," she continues, "because we feel so unsafe from the violence and oppression, and the results of the oppression stalk us and those we love." Our questions about how long and our realization that the road is long and winding and sometimes, like those Bay Area freeways, strewn with obstacles, make us realize that it is indeed Advent, not yet Christmas, with its promised peace on earth, goodwill to all. And while the tradition celebrates this day as the Sunday of joy, we know that we are yet far from the fullness of joy that Christmas promises. So how do we journey on this long and winding and sometimes pock-marked road where we don't have the assurances of cheap or simple or easy or shallow answers about how long? I know that both this sermon and my sermon of 2 weeks ago are perhaps hard to hear, and they certainly are full of intensity. And I promise you that next week's won't be quite so heavy. And yet I'm profoundly convinced, as I said a moment ago, that if we don't honestly confront the ambiguity of Advent, we can never fully appreciate the celebration of Christmas. Again, as Barbara says, Advent is a strange, quote, two-track celebration. We celebrate a memory, the memory of Christ's first coming into the world, and we also celebrate a hope towards the time when Christ comes again and brings the world justice and peace. We're looking back at Bethlehem, and we're looking ahead to a better world. This is a bit awkward, she says, looking backward and forward at the same time, singing joy to the world, and at the same time singing, "Come, thou long expected Jesus, come and set your people free." My friends, I don't have an easy answer this morning for you to the question of how long. What I do have are 3 suggestions about how it is that we can nonetheless faithfully journey along this sometimes winding and tumultuous 2-track road toward Christmas. The first is this: if we wait until that road is clear, we won't get anywhere. And if we fantasize about what it would be like if there were no obstacles in the road, we won't get any further down it. No matter how many times I was stuck in that Bay Area traffic, jammed up by those porta potties and those chickens, my daydreaming about a road that had no cars on it but mine didn't get me 1 foot further down that road. So the first suggestion of how we navigate our way through Advent towards Christmas is simply this: go. Go. Do you notice how often that word is used at crucial points in the Bible? Jesus tells the women at the empty tomb, "Go and tell." He tells his disciples that their task after he was gone was to what? Go into the world seeking the lost. If we wait until our road is clear, if we wait for peace to fully come, if we wait for all the hurts to go away, if we wait for every pain to cease, then we will not have done the good we could have done, and we will still be stuck where we are. Second, and relatedly, A friend of mine is fond of quoting a line from the Spanish poet Antonio Machado. Se hace camino al andar. We make the road by walking it. You see, for example, if you are perplexed about racism in our society and you don't know how to fully think about it, or about your own attitudes or the ways that we all may be prejudiced, but we can't fully articulate. And so if we decide then, because of that, we won't do anything until we have everything perfectly clarified in our minds, well, I have to tell you, we will fail. But if we simply start out on that road, making mistakes, no doubt, but through our words and actions, the things that we read and the Facebook postings that we follow and share, if we make it clear that we want to be more the kind of person that Jesus hopes we will be, the kind of society where privilege is not the privilege of one race or orientation or class or gender, but the privilege for all to serve the goals of justice and equality. Where, as Dr. King put it, the content of a person's character is what counts. Well, then, if we go in that direction, then we will find that the road indeed opens up in front of us as we make our way by walking it. For as the always eloquent and often provocative Denver pastor Nadia Boltz-Weber says, God always wants to redeem our stuff and our mistakes. But if we can't be open about the fact that we've made mistakes, that's a barrier then to experiencing forgiveness and redemption and grace. You make the road to Christmas by walking it, trusting indeed that God will find you along the way. Third, on that road toward Christmas, don't walk it alone. The Advent and Christmas season can be one of the most isolating times of the year, but that can drive you deeper into sadness and even despair. Robert Fulghum's now classic book, All I Really Needed to Know I Learned in Kindergarten, has a line in it that remains true. Do you remember it? It's one of the things he says he learned in kindergarten that served him well all his whole life. When you go out into the world, watch out for traffic, hold hands, stick together. One writer once famously said, quote, just showing up is 80% of life, but sometimes it's easier to hide at home in bed. I've done both, he says. Haven't we all? In fact, do you know the old joke that goes like this? A mother went to wake her son for church one Sunday morning, and when she knocked on his door, he said, I'm not going. Why not? She asked. I'll give you 2 good reasons, he said. 1, they don't like me. 2, it's just too early to go to church. His mother then replied, well, I'll give you 2 good reasons why you will go to church. 1, you're 47 years old. And 2, you're the pastor. At the prospect of a long road that sometimes seems scary and even painful, the temptation to pull the covers up and stay in bed is oh so strong sometimes. But my Advent and Christmas counsel to you is to muster up whatever you need so that you can indeed show up. Show up and begin walking that road, but don't do it alone. That's what the church is for. Imperfect as it is, the church is the place, the people who connect with 100 generations of those who have come before us, who have walked those sometimes lonely roads, who have shown up and who have remembered through the beauty of song and ritual that God always shows up with them. Always. Indeed, walking that road with you is a whole tradition initiated by a motley band of shepherds and a regal crew of wise men who began the journey a long time ago and found themselves in the presence of an awe-filled grace that changed them and changed the world. So, the third thing is this. Your road does lie in front of you, a road through the thickets of Advent heading toward Christmas. Show up. Show up. But don't think you have to show up alone. Hold hands. Stick together. Did you hear our second scripture from the Gospel of Luke? If you weren't listening closely, you might have thought that the prophet Zechariah is celebrating the coming birth of Jesus. The one who, he says, will present the offer of salvation to his people for forgiveness of sin. But it's not about Jesus. It's about John the Baptist. He is the forerunner on the road, the pace car, if you will, the one who makes a way, the one who prepares a place for the coming Christ in the hearts and minds of those who would hear. And that is exactly our opportunity too this season, to walk along those roads of our lives, even if it is sometimes a debris-strewn journey, always wanting to make room for Jesus, to live in such a way that Christ will be born again and again in the lives of those whom you meet on your path and who need the joy that he brings. For as Zechariah says, God's sunrise will break upon us, shining on those in darkness, showing us the way one foot at a time, down the path of peace, the path of hope, the path of joy. Shall we walk it together?